Tonight I want to begin by asking you a few questions. How many words do you think you read in the past week? How many different kinds of print material do you think you read? Maybe you read a book. Maybe you read a magazine. Maybe you read directions to that treehouse you're building for your kids in the backyard. Maybe you read the back of your grandmother's medicine bottle. And maybe you read that recipe last night that you followed when you made that delicious veal piccata for your wife. That was you, right? Even just think about the last 5 things you read today. Reading is part of everything we do, yet we pay little attention to its importance. The fact that we can read and that we have an abundance of reading material is probably something we take for granted. I certainly do today, and definitely did as a child. I am a product of privilege. I grew up in a middle-income family on the East Coast. My parents empowered me to believe I could be anything I wanted to be and do anything I wanted to do. I read early, I read often, I succeeded in school. I went on to graduate from high school, I attended a top university, and when I graduated with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, I found a job immediately and have been employed ever since. And now I'm raising my children in a literacy-rich environment. My daughter, Shana, has been surrounded by books since birth, and she's been read to every evening. Now I want to tell you the story of Maya. Maya lives on the other side of town. Maya's parents didn't go to college. Her mother graduated from high school, but her father didn't. He hasn't been part of her life since she was born. In Maya's family, money's tight. And when it comes to choosing between a gallon of milk or a book, the gallon of milk always wins. By the age of 3, the academic paths of Shana and Maya are fairly easy to predict. By grade 3, they are nearly ordained. By the time Shana turns 3, she will have read 30 more million words than Maya, thanks to the literacy-rich environment she'd been exposed to, and advantages like preschool, things Maya won't have growing up. Maya will enter kindergarten already behind. By the end of 3rd grade, Shana will be reading proficiently. Maya will not. Shana will make that critical pivot from learning to read to reading to learn. She'll be able to use those reading skills to access the math, the science, the social studies content that she needs to be successful in school. And as that content becomes more cognitively demanding, she'll develop the higher level thinking skills and the problem-solving skills she needs not just to be successful in school, but to be successful in life. She'll develop confidence in herself as a student. She'll go on to graduate from high school, attend a university, graduate, and find a job and earn an income probably comparable to the one she was raised on. And ultimately, when she has children, she will raise them in a literacy-rich environment. Maya, on the other hand, she won't make that critical pivot from learning to read to reading to learn. She'll fall further and further behind as that content becomes more demanding. As she becomes more and more frustrated, she'll likely have attendance issues, behavior problems. There's a good chance she'll drop out of school. And if she goes on to get a job, she's probably going to earn an income comparable to the one her family was raised on. And sadly, when she has children, they won't be raised in a literacy-rich environment. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a case study in intergenerational poverty. Shana's story and Maya's hypothetical one are not isolated cases, but instead they're representative of distressing national trends. According to the U.S. Department of Education, 83% of children from low-income families are reading below proficiency. That's 30% higher than their middle to upper-income peers. In 2011, there were 22 million children from low-income families. If 83% were reading below proficiency, that means 19 million face an increased risk of dropping out of high school. And dropping out of high school impacts you, me, and everyone within our community. A high school dropout costs this nation up to $260,000 annually in lost earnings, lost taxes, and lost productivity. High school dropouts are more likely to become incarcerated or to become teenage parents, both of which have significant fiscal and social consequences for our communities. And we all know that high school dropouts, if they get jobs, they're going to earn less money. They're twice as likely to be unemployed, and if they do go on to get a job, they're going to earn half as much as their peers who graduated from high school. So what do we do to break this cycle for Maya and the millions of children like her in this nation? It starts with developing more fertile literacy landscapes. Children from low-income families and low-income communities, they're growing up in intellectual deserts. Their access to intellectual resources, intellectual stimulation, intellectual growth, intellectual curiosity is incredibly limited in these barren landscapes. You've all heard of the concept of a food desert, right? Places typically in low-income communities where residents don't have access to high-quality, good, healthy, nutritious food. As awareness of this need has been brought to people's attention, communities have come together and they've invested in providing the sustenance needed to develop the healthy minds of children by providing them the food that they need. The same need exists when it comes to feeding the mind. Access to reading materials, and books in particular, is just as important for feeding the mind as food is for feeding the body. In middle-income communities, on average, each child has around 13 books, whereas in low-income communities, there's one book for every 300 children. One book for every 300 children. Can you even imagine that? Furthermore, studies were done looking at access to the quality and quantity of print in communities. So signs and posters and pamphlets in businesses explaining products, and even just places welcoming people to come and sit and read within a community. There were discrepancies found between those upper income and lower income communities, of course, and it's all of these factors that are contributing to the intellectual deserts that are facing our neediest communities. This brings us to the question, how do we shift from these desert-like literacy ecosystems to a more fertile environment for all children's minds? Juan's story can help us reimagine what a more fertile literacy landscape might look like. Juan's a fourth grader, and by the end of the year, his backpack has grown so heavy that his teacher finally says to him, "Juan, you're coming in today during recess, we're emptying that bag." He reluctantly comes in, and sure enough, when he unzips that bag, she finds the collection of books that he's been amassing over the course of the year. Her initial reaction was to admonish him for lugging all those books back and forth each day. But fortunately, before she opened her mouth, she realized the reason Juan was lugging those books back and forth every day was because he didn't have a place he could call home, a place where he could build a bookshelf. When she asked Juan about this, he shared that these books were the only thing that belonged to him, and he refused to risk losing them as he traveled from motel to shelter to motel and back again. For Juan, these books allowed him to explore a world that he couldn't imagine living in, and they provided him the opportunity to envision a much brighter future for himself. Juan was fortunate to grow up in a literacy-rich environment. And now I invite you to imagine with me what that might have looked like for Juan and to reimagine what that might look like in all of our communities. First and foremost, every home, regardless of zip code, would be full of reading materials. Every classroom in every school would have an endless supply of things that kids want to read and that were at an appropriate reading level to help them develop as readers. Libraries would be open after school, on the weekends, in the summer. Community partners and churches and nonprofit organizations would be coming together to offer classes to parents to teach them how to read and how to read to their children. Parents who can't read will understand, they will have learned from their community that simply sitting that child in their lap, opening the book, looking at the pictures, and predicting what might happen in the story, that in and of itself will develop the vocabulary that child needs to start kindergarten ready to learn instead of behind like Maya. Parents who speak a language other than English, they will have learned from their community that teaching their child how to read in that first language is the greatest gift that they could give their child, because then they'll be able to transition those skills from reading in a first language to a second language that much more easily. Everywhere you go within that community, there'll be an abundance of words and books and stories and print material, whether it's the grocery store or the park or public transportation, lending libraries, tubs of overflowing with gently used books to share, and all those places that we take for granted in our communities, inviting us to simply sit and read. Juan was fortunate to grow up in a community like this. He read proficiently by the end of 3rd grade. He graduated from high school, went on to college, got a degree, found a job, and he's become a contributing member of our society. And now, he's raising his children in a family where he's fostering a love of learning and a love of reading. Juan's story demonstrates for us that poverty is not a death sentence to educational success. Literacy is a right. It's a right for all children. And illiteracy is one of the greatest civil rights challenges facing this nation today. We have a moral obligation to ensure that all children realize the right of literacy. Ensuring that we're developing a community of readers and more fertile literacy landscapes is critical to that success. I hope that this evening I've inspired you to own this cause. And I hope that I've inspired you to reimagine a more fertile literacy landscape, not just in your home, but within your community as well. Thank you.